Okay. Well, there, everybody. This is Alan Blumkin on the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. I'm here with my usual co-host, David Nemec, and our guest today, Eric Mikwich. David, would you like to introduce Eric and the topic?
I would very much. Al and I have been doing this show now for a couple of months, and we've been featuring 19th century baseball a lot. And we actually have today as our guest someone who has played 19th century baseball in all its various forms. He is probably the face of vintage baseball today. And he's also got other parts of his athletic career that I'm sure he'd love to share with us. And Eric, welcome aboard. Really glad to have you here with us.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Al. Very kind words, David. Thank you again.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got into vintage baseball? What brought you to it?
I am from Long Island, which is in New York, and there's a historic village, Old Bethpage Village Restoration, that actually started the baseball program in 1979. I happened to see an ad that the games were going to be played in 1983 they called it old-time baseball at the time. I was very interested. I went down with a buddy of mine, and unfortunately, the game never came off. I always had it in the back of my mind that I wanted to play and understand what this vintage baseball was. And then I went to a wedding in 96. A buddy of mine was there, and he was telling me about the vintage program at Old Bethpage. He and I played softball together. He said, you really should get involved in this. It's great. He explained it. Essentially, at the time, they played in 1860s, what they called game, which really is 1864 rule baseball. And he explained that he used gloves and some of the rules, and I was really intrigued to learn that this existed not only, of course, historically, but actually in the playing form. He gave me a number to call. I called the person at the Village Restoration who was organizing it. He didn't call me back. And then 2 years later, I happened to see him again. He said, how's it going at Bethpage? He had since stopped playing. And I told him no one had gotten back to me. And he said, here, try this person. And I did. And from 1998 and even through till today, and I'll continue, I've been playing at Bethpage. I started there, as I said, in 1998. Within 2 years, I was one of the volunteer coordinators of the program, which involved putting the various fields together for the different rule sets we play per year, organizing the yearly festival, which is pretty famous within the 19th century community. And I ended up forming more than one team, a travel team, that would go out with the players inside of Bethpage and then promote the game to other towns within New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Connecticut. Wherever we were hired, we would go out and help put on an exhibition, and many, many times these communities would then form teams.
I've been at Bethpage several times, not recently because for a variety of reasons. I really enjoyed myself watching that. I've seen played by 1864 rules, 1887 ruls, which some of the players had trouble to adjusting because of the four strikes. And
Al, I would say to that, some of the players had trouble to adjusting because of the speed of the pitching. The pitchers were throwing from 55 and a half feet to home base, and before I got there, they were using an inauthentic glove, and that made it even more difficult. They're using a modern glove, so here you have a pitcher throwing a baseball from 55 and a half feet. You have no batting helmet on, of course, no batting gloves, 4 strikes, 5 balls. A lot of what they termed as 1860s players couldn't make that transition. You had to be really a baseball player to play that 1887 game. And there was a big, big fraction within Bethpage because those rules were so different, and very few of the 1860s players crossed over to the 1887 league. After I was there a few years, I was able to have that, what we call the overhand game, changed to the 1884 American Association rules, and we used that for 6 seasons until they did away with the overhand game, as I said, because there weren't enough players to make up that overhand style play. Now, that's not to say that style of play is more difficult overall, but the rules are so much different than an 1864 game that it was difficult to train people to play that. It's much easier to train them to play an 1864 game. It's a slower paced game as compared to 1887, but it's faster than modern baseball.
One thing that I found remarkable, Eric, I've been on, like Alan, I've been on a number of times, Elizabeth Page, is the actual setting. You really feel like you're back in the 1860s or 1870s. When you're sitting there, there are some bleachers, rudimentary bleachers. Players are sitting on open benches. Spectators bring food, beer, whatever. And the actual setting, when you're looking out toward the field, there's nothing you see in your sight line that disturbs your vision of the way the game was played in the 1860s, 1870s, and so on. The field is extraordinary. It's in central Long Island, and anyone coming to New York who's interested in seeing 19th century baseball or a form of it, this is certainly the place to come. You should make that a special day trip. And
yes,
also,
David, I would say that.
Go ahead, Eric.
I was going to say I've played over 800 games, many outside of New York. As I said, Pennsylvania, Connecticut. I've played as far as Chicago, Rhode Island. That field is the best field in the country. It's only sitting next. The rebirth of 19th century baseball started there, and it does have the best field. So from what I've seen throughout the United States.
Yeah, no, I agree. From what I've played vintage baseball in other parts of the country, usually at Society for American Baseball Research conventions, and none of the fields we've ever played on come close at all to Old Bethpage. Also, the remarkable thing about Eric that I find about you is that you're capable of. You're mainly a pitcher, and you're as far as I know, and I'm pretty sure this is correct. You're the only pitcher to date to win 300 games in vintage baseball and recognized competition. And that, to me, is an extraordinary feat in itself, but you're also capable of playing other positions as well. On the days you're not pitching, you can be posted pretty much any place on the diamond, including catcher. And I find your versatility extraordinary. And it carries over to real baseball too, because you do play. I think we should mention you also play in a senior league with wooden bats. So you do have an extraordinary depth of experience in baseball in general. And plus, we should talk about another sport which really came more active in your life before vintage baseball. And perhaps you can share that with us.
Yes, I can. I want to go back to your statement about the 19th century game. Again, those comments are very much appreciated. When you are asked to join a 19th century team, the players are limited as far as you're not going to have a 40 or 50-man roster. Your organization may have non-playing members, just as went on in the 1850s and 60s and so on. But you can never count on all your players showing up for every event or every game. So as a result, every player has to be multifaceted and be able to play numerous positions and play them fairly well. You're never going to know when you have to be plugged into a position other than what you would call your natural position. I would have to say that for a 19th century player, their natural position would be any one of the 9. It's really important that they can play almost any position. And I'm a pitcher first. I play catcher and shortstop. Those are, I would play those more often, but I played first. I played every other position there is. And the players on my current team, the Brooklyn Experts, they're asked to do the same. Many times our catcher, who is actually the best in the country, Danny Localzo, if he can't make a match, someone else has to catch, or I can't pitch the way I pitch. So we were able to plug in players to different positions, just like every club throughout the country needs to. And the better players you have, the more skilled players you have the opportunity to lose less depth when your regular person is not at that position. So it's very important to know all the positions, to understand the rules you're playing and what those positions demand, and to be able to play them well. Now, you also mentioned something else. I was with the New York Islanders for 7 seasons. I was a equipment manager and a practice goalie. And for those of you who watch hockey on TV and say to yourself, wow, that's a fast game, get on the ice and understand how fast it is and how fast those pucks come at you and how accurate those players are. It's really amazing.
You still play, and you still do play recreational hockey, which is phenomenal, I think. And we should also mention that Eric has an extraordinary 19th century website that you really need to take a look at. He goes into the rules, he goes into the history, some of the players' biographies. And Eric is also an author. He's worked on 2 books with me. Book on all the history and complete roundup of all the forfeited and successfully protested games in Major League history, excluding the one that happened last year, because our book was published prior to that occurrence. And he also worked with me on Major League Baseball profiles, 1871 to 1900, which is a historical roundup of biographies of every Major League player, regular umpire, owner, manager, real compendium. And Eric's contributions were very significant.
Yeah, Eric, one thing that I always wanted to ask, how do people learn how to catch a hard ball with no glove?
Al, that's a great question. Let me just say this. The ones that can't, don't play. But in more seriousness, it's very, very similar to lacrosse. When you're receiving a pass from lacrosse, you have the head of your stick, it's lined up, and the ball comes in. You give with the ball as it comes at you, and then you hold your stick stop. So the ball kind of comes in and gets coiled in the head of the lacrosse stick. It's the same for us. When you catch a ball, you have to give your hands, your wrists, your forearms, everything collapses to catch that ball. And that's the same if you're playing first base or you're playing the outfield. Of course, if you're playing the 1864 game, you're catching the ball on the bounce. There's really no art to that. It's very simple. But when someone's throwing a ball to you, the third baseman, a ball gets hit you with third baseman, you have a fast batter. He whips that ball to first base. That first baseman's got to catch it, and he's got to extend his hand, collapse his elbows, his shoulders, his wrists, and cradle that ball into his chest if it's thrown there. The minute, my experience is, when you hear a ball smack someone's hand like a clap, they're not going to catch the ball because that's a movable force, meaning the ball hitting immovable force, which would be that person's hand at the time. The ball will never be caught. You want to hear like a little soft pump in the hand, and you'll know the ball will be caught.
Wow, thank you. Also, with the rules before 1878, you play with the fair foul rule?
Yes, sir. The fair foul rule is in effect. Much to Chadwick's dislike, yes, we do use it.
Can you explain? I'm sure a lot of people in our audience are unfamiliar with the fair foul rule, which was an extraordinary part of the early game. Perhaps you can explain it to us, Eric.
Sure. What that was, as Al said, prior to 79, any batted ball that was hit, that first landed in fair ground and then went foul, was a fair ball. It wasn't until, 78, that the first and third base bag determine the ball being fair or foul. It just has happened today. A batter hits the ball. It's got to pass those bags in fair territory to be a fair ball. If it goes over the bag or to the inside of the bag, it's a fair foul. It's still a fair ball. Up until 78, any batted ball.
78 or 77?
Yes.
78?
Yes. It ended with the 78 season. So 77 was the last year.
Okay.
Any up until then, where the ball first hit the ground, determined fair foul. If it foul, it was foul. If it's fair and went foul, it was fair ball. And that was used by Ross Barnes, probably one of the more famous ball players. He would choke up, drive that ball into the ground in fair territory near his feet and let it caroon, into foul territory, and he'd hit up cleanly on the bases. And it was very effective. It was used more in the 60s when the pitching was much slower, more the underhand style before you had real true sidearm. But it was easier to do with what you would term the underhand game as opposed to the overhand game. You had much more time with the ball coming at you prior to, I'd say, 72 when they start to really go a little more sidearm than normal. You had a lot more time to do with that ball what you needed to do.
Okay. What year did you play the most? What year rules do you play the most?
I played in 1864. That's the game that's played throughout the United States and the teams in Canada. That is, it allows it's because of the last year of the fair bound rule, and that adds a nice element to the game for the fans who've not ever seen 19th century baseball before. So that style, when someone sees a ball caught in the back, the batter's out, but here he is. But then why the base runner's running? Well, because the ball's not caught in the fly, and they have to catch on the fly in order for the batter to advance. They have to tag up. That's one of the elements of 1864 that makes it interesting. The other element is having to you cannot overrun first base without the opportunity to be put out. So you see many players sliding into first. There are 3 balls and 3 strikes. Each before you get a strike, you get a warning. Before you get a ball called as a pitcher, you get a warning from the umpire. That's another change. And of course, the fair foul is always an interesting caveat to the game.
Are you allowed to call high or low pitches when you're hitting?
That is a big controversy with what we call 1860 baseball. That rule was not put into place until the first year of the National Association, which was 1871. Prior to that, the rules do not say that the batter is allowed to call his pitch. There are some historians that say that it was done. It may well have been done. However, according to the written rules up until 1871, the pitcher was not inclined to put the ball wherever the batter wanted. The only rule was they had to throw a hittable ball. And let's just stay with 1864. A hittable ball in 1864 would be fair reach of the bat from your mid-shin to really the top of your hat. That would.
And it didn't have to be over the plate necessarily.
Right. The dish didn't determine balls or strikes. It was where the batter stood and the length of the batter's bat would determine the striking zone. Now, let me use myself as an example. I use a 40-inch bat that's 44 ounces. My striking zone is going to be bigger than someone who's using a 36-inch bat, right? I have 4 more inches. So an outside pitch to me to an outside pitch to someone using a 36-inch bat, it would not be an outside pitch to me. I still have plenty of bat to get on that ball. So a good umpire, before a batter gets to the striking line, looks at where he's standing in relationship to the plate. He has 3 feet to play with, and then what kind of a bat that batter is using.
What about the catcher's protective equipment? Do they use any, or they have to stand like way behind the batter.
Well, in the 1864 game, we'll say, no, they don't use any equipment at all. My catcher does not. I'm sure he wears a cup, but there's no mask, no chest protector, no shin guards, no glove. And he does adjust himself as depending on where the runners are on the bases.
Wow.
So as you said, Al, if nobody's on base, he wants to get a little bit further away from the batter to receive a foul tip that may come back his way.
Oh.
And when there is someone on first base or second base with the potential to steal, he's going to move up to shorten that distance from me getting the ball to the catcher and then from him making a throw to, third, second base to pick off the runner. That is a element of the game that goes back to, if you read the Beatles in 1860, for example, that stated in there the catcher should adjust his position with runners on base, and he's adjusting his position with runners on base simply to cut off the steal.
We should mention too that a foul tip, regardless of the count, was out automatically. And if the ball was tipped and caught on the first bounce, it was an out.
Wow.
And that rule persisted fairly deep into the 19th century.
Yes, David, that rule went to 1879. They stopped it for a year, brought it back in 81 and 82, and then the National League cut it for the 83 season. That went from the beginning of what you want to say baseball, the beginning, which would be September 23rd, 1845. If you want to use that as the Knickerbocker's date for writing down the rules, all the way through 79, that was it held steady. And the American Association carried it through till June 7th of 1885 when they started, even though the National League had dropped it for the 1883 season. And that was one of the reasons why I chose 1884, because it helped shorten the game when you have overhand pitching, but yet any foul ball you can make a play on to make an out. I thought that was real advantageous to the fielding team, and it was also exciting for the fans to see people taking off like madmen for a foul ball that they may have a chance to make an out on.
And the American Association, a rebel major league, which formed in 1882, we should mention, retained the foul bound rule through the 1884 season, its third season of existence. So an outfielder racing after a foul ball, it made sense. It was important to be able to catch up to it on the first bounce. If you got it on the first bounce, the batter was out. In contrast to that, interesting enough and somewhat inexplicable, a foul ball, a first bounce fly ball caught in the field of play, a fair ball, was not an out. It had to be caught on the fly by 1884. So there were a lot of very strange, idiosyncratic rules that were in Major League Baseball throughout the 19th century. And Eric is...
were stolen bases and pickoffs allowed at that point?
Yes, they were.
Yes, sir. Al, there was nothing written in the rules, and we'll start with the Beatles' 1860 guide. Nothing written that says you could not steal. And there's a controversy within the 19th century community that some people felt that batters did not steal. And I strongly disagree, simply because if you read the catching position in the 1860 Beatles guide, it tells you that the catcher should adjust his position, which means in relationship to the batter, if there are runners on base. Why would the catcher want to get close to the pitcher with a man on first or second? It's simply because those base runners are stealing. And I can't tell you with what frequency they stole with. I would have to say they did it quite often, because very few pitchers were throwing fast. When I say fast, I mean like Crichton. Like you had Jim Crichton, of course, a fellow that I think was even better than him, Joe Sprague with the Brooklyn Experts. You had Bernard Hannigan with the Union, and you had Stevens, who pitched with the Gotham. Those were the few people throwing fast, and they had the best chance to get a base runner stealing, whether it's first or second or third. The faster you get the ball to the catcher, and depending where his distance is to the batter, the faster he can get it to the base he needs to get it to cut off that runner from moving ahead. If you're just going to go up to the ball, if you're going to go up and lob the ball to the batter, that runner on first or second who's attending the field is going to have quite a jump even before that ball, really gets anywhere near home base. So I don't know, though, if the teams really realized how valuable moving runners up was. It's really impossible to tell. The box scores, very few of detailed. There are some box scores from the 1860s, and that goes all the way through to 69 that have some really detailed accounts of the game, but they're not as many as just a paragraph, a small paragraph blurb on the game. So the writers were not as intense in writing about the game as the writers are today. Certainly, the information isn't as valuable as it is today as it was back then. So we can only speculate of really how the game was played. We have to use what we read in the newspaper and what we can decipher from the rules how the game was played. And that's what makes it interesting for me for 19th century baseball. The game was different.
One thing that led me to the next question I have, when was the balk rule installed?
Well,
the balks.
Yeah. We'll stick with 1864. You can do anything as long as you didn't take home. That was one way to balk. Another way to balk would be to hold the ball so long in the eyes of the umpire that you were delaying the game. It could call a balk then. But it doesn't say in the rules what happens when a balk is called in 1860, 1862. The rules are not that specific. I think 1860 had 38 rules, and of course, as the years went on, the rules became more detailed as players and managers found ways around those rules. But in the beginnings of baseball, it just said, hey, if you fake home, essentially, it's a balk. But it doesn't say what happens when the balk is called.
And it's always, when did they first begin to spell it out in the rule book, what a balk involved, what the penalty was for a balk? Whether the batter received his base, whether the runner got to move up, whether a ball was assessed. It's very confusing for, I think, most fans trying to get into the 19th century to be able to find the dividing lines between some of these rules.
Yes, the rules were certainly not written as specific as they are today. I can tell you, though, again, let's stick with 1864. A foul balk was if a pitcher threw 3 overhand pitches to a batter in a game, in his sequence, the game was over. That's the best I can tell you of what would happen. At the foul ball, overhand pitch to the same batter 3 times in that instant, the game was over. So that must have happened in order for that rule to be in that place.
Did you ever find an instance where it happened, where a game ended that way?
Never in all my readings. I have not. But in order for there to be a rule, it had to happen at some point. And my experience is these rules, starting with 1860 and going all the way through the 19th century, as they developed and became more complex, it was to stop people going around the rules, to put in a rule against an instance that have come up and, wow, we never had this before, so let's make a rule about it. It developed just as the game developed, the rules developed. And certainly the rules makers, I don't think they had the foresight to see, wow, what would happen if we put this rule in? Is someone going to do this to get around it? That they started out as a leisurely sport and became, certainly by 1858, it was a little bit of a business, became a bigger business, but the rules are always going to be circumvented, but the rules makers, certainly in the 19th century, early 19th century, can never predict how they would be circumvented. So they would put a rule in place to stop something after it occurred multiple times.
Wow.
Yeah, when we were doing the forfeits and protested games book, we came across a lot of incidents that were pivotal in forcing a rule change to occur the following year, because there was nothing in the rule book at that time to cover it, and there were some very, very bizarre situations as a result.
Yeah.
But basically, I think it was a lot fun to watch then in some ways, because it was so unpredictable. There were you never knew what you were going to see from one game to the next.
Yeah, David, I would have to say for the people listening, the book we wrote on the forfeits, it's the first time in baseball history anybody compiled all of those, and that's really, it's a storybook, but it's really a history book of the rules. As and you can see, these instances come up and they say, holy cow, as a reader, a modern-day reader of only watching modern-day baseball, you could never believe that games would be forfeited over a baseball, over a train schedule, over darkness. These are things that we cannot fathom today because they don't exist. But back in the early 19th century, as baseball was developing, those things were actual elements working against baseball.
The first one I remember as a kid was when the Cardinals forfeit the second game of the Sunday doubleheader in Philadelphia because Eddie Stanky, I think they were losing something like 9-0 or 8-0, and Stanky, who was the manager, was stalling so they wouldn't get the 5 innings before the curfew hit.
Yeah, Philadelphia had the blue law then in effect.
Yeah, that was the first forfeited game that I remember when I was young. That's how I learned.
There were frequent forfeits really until just lately. Really, the game now has changed to an extent where you don't want to forfeit a game. You don't want to have to pay. You know, if you forfeit a game, fans are get their money back. Also, if you forfeit a game or a protested game that's upheld, you have to replay the game. There's too much money involved. The teams and
It's the last game in Washington, and the 10-cent beer night in Cleveland, disco demolition night in Chicago.
Those were, and the Pine Tower game, of course, at Yankee Stadium.
They resumed that.
Yeah, they resumed it, but
they made a farce.
We
resumed it.
We wrote extensively about those.
Yeah, those were very, a lot of very interesting games, and some that were really hidden from sight until we got into some of our research in the early days and found games that previously had been undiscovered as forfeited.
In the meeting we had at Sabre up in Albany in 1989, one of the guests was Jack Aker, the relief pitcher, and he was rooting for the forfeit because he stood to be the losing pitcher in that game. Last game in Washington. Yeah.
Right.
They said
I think, and Joe Grisenda would have gotten the win, and he was very disappointed. He could have, but that was bizarre.
There's an outfielder who spoke at one of our meetings named Rusty Torres, who was present at all 3 of those games.
Yeah, I remember him.
Yeah, he was at the Washington forfeit, and then he went to the Indians, and he was at the 10-cent beer night. And then he was, he was on I think he's on either the White Sox or the Tigers, and he was at the disco demolition night.
He probably is the only one who can make that claim, including, he may be the only one connected with baseball in any level who can make that claim.
And the suspended. I remember there's a game in I think in 1922 World Series that was suspended when there's still substantial daylight left, and there's a little riot.
They called it for because of darkness. Yeah.
Also, Eric, in the 1880s, I know they were changing the number of balls for a walk every year. Was that very difficult to deal with?
I would have to say it would be more difficult for the umpire. It went as high as 9 in 1876 when you had unfair, and then your third one was ball 1, and you needed 3 of those to walk. That went from 9 all the way down. Of course, what we have today is 4, which is 1889, and went to 4 balls, 3 strikes. But I think more difficult for a pitcher is the fact that foul balls were not strikes.
Yeah. And
you think of the 1887 game where you have 5 balls to walk and 4 balls to strike out, where you have to swing and miss. And I pitched many, many games at that page, and I can only imagine those guys pitching that, those pitchers throwing. It's impossible to fathom the pitch counts that these gentlemen went through. Put aside the innings. How many average of pitches they're throwing per inning? They're really remarkable athletes. They certainly weren't in condition as the athletes are today. But athletes today, if you pitch 200 innings, you're like a king. you have guys pitching regularly 400, 500 innings. Of course, Will Wright has the record with 680 and 79, but it's the strikes, the strikes and the foul ball not being a strike. That's the biggest thing for a pitcher. Now, I can say the 1887 rules did have a provision in there that says if the umpire in his judgment felt the batter was intentionally fouling balls off, he could call a strike. I don't have any instance that ever occurred, but it was in the rule, so it must have been something that the rules makers thought was the players were doing intentionally and put that in there to help. I wouldn't say aid the pitcher, but speed the game along. You know,
it was obvious that many of them were doing it intentionally because until 1895, a deliberately fouled bunt was not called a strike. So you could stand up at the plate and just tap the pitch as foul at will until you either got one you liked, or if you were like Yank Robinson, who even if you got one you liked, you weren't going to do much with it. You would wait for a walk. And so really, it's almost impossible to say when the modern game actually began because there are important rule changes right up until the beginning of the 20th century that affected the game as we know it today.
I agree with you, David. You know what I would say? I would think the modern game began, the closest we can come to would be 87. That's when they stopped the pitcher. He had a pause between balls. He had to start at a specific point, have a specific posture toward the plate. To me, 1887, that rule year was the beginning, although very loosely, the beginning of modern baseball. Prior to 1887, anytime the pitcher received the ball back from the catcher, he could throw it right back to the catcher, as long as, if you're talking post 74, if you're standing in the pitcher's box, and after, before 74, if you're standing between the two lines from 63 to 73, if you're standing between those two lines of that era or in the box after 74, and you got the ball from the catcher, you could throw it right back. And that was a big advantage to the pitchers, to get the ball thrown right back. It's difficult for a batter to stand there and be ready to hit for 30 seconds or 45 seconds, whatever that may take. Today, they throw a pitcher's throwing, the guy gets out, steps out, does whatever, gets back in. It's really it's like playing golf. It's so leisurely. But when you're a batter and you have to be aware, okay, a pitch came in, I see it go back to the pitcher. It might come back, it might not. He might pause a little longer. He might throw it. You're always ready to hit. That wears you down as a batter for that little instance. Your specific time at plate, and it wears you down. When you stop the pitcher and you take the element away, it gives then the batter advantage, and that's what happened in 1887. Aside from keeping the ball, moving the strike to 4 from what was customarily 3 at that time. The warning had gone away in the 1870s. That really.
But in 1887, they took away the high-low pitch. They had a uniform strike zone for every batter. A batter could no longer say, I only want to pitch below my waist or above my waist. He had to take whatever he was dealt.
Yes, that's true. Now, David, just think, if you're a pitcher, in the calling of the high and low strike zone was a rule put in there against the pitchers because they have the element of throwing the ball whenever they wanted to. But now they had to throw it whenever they wanted to, yet in an area the batter called for. Still difficult. You still have a little bit of a surprise. 1887 comes, there's no calling of the strike zone, but now the pitcher's got to pause between every single pitch. He has to pause after he fakes the first base or throws the first base or fakes the second. You have to pause. Prior to 1887, you could fake the first, and then throw home. You could really hold the runner on, and that was a big advantage to the pitcher.
You didn't even have to be facing the batter when you pitched, delivered your pitch.
Not till 87. You
could be facing first base up until then.
Yeah.
What about head hunting? Did that go on at all? Beanball?
Well,
beanballs. Yeah, what we're talking about, how a batter had to be ready.
I know.
Imagine what it was like if you were dusted off and you're not even able to pick yourself up off the ground, and you're already another pitch coming in. I'm sure there was stuff like that going on all the time, and some pitchers were masters of it.
Oh, eventually, I put the quick pitch rule in.
Yeah. Well, if you look at the rules when they became professional from 1871 on, although really baseball was professional before then, but really professional, there was provisions in there that the umpire could find a pitcher on the spot if he felt he was throwing in a batter. Now, batters did not receive their base on balls until the American Association, which started, as David mentioned earlier, in 1882. In 1884, they put a provision in there that if the batter was hit solidly with the ball, he would then get his base. The National League didn't have that rule. It wasn't until the two leagues, the American Association and the National League, agreed to play the same rules in 1887 that a batter hit by a pitched ball would get first base. But just think of all those years prior to that. You could hit a batter a few times. It would be called a ball, but you could hit him in his at bat. And
that had to be tough on some players, some hitters.
Yeah.
It was.
Yeah.
Sure, Al, but you have to realize they're not throwing as fast as they are today because the lack of the catching glove really affects the speed of the pitcher. And I say that for two reasons. One, the catcher has to handle a ball, a pitched ball, when there's a runner on first or second, they're going to make a steal. The pitcher that's going to throw it, so that catcher can receive that ball and make a play on that runner or runner is stealing. The other element is that, and this went, I know it went to 01, I don't know how much further it went, but from 1871 at least to 1901, any pitched ball that hit an object within 90 feet of home base gave all base runners their free base. Now, when they say object, they mean the grandstand or the backstop. The only backstop that was built inside of 90 feet to home base, and a pitcher throws a ball, and the catcher can handle it, hits that backstop, these runners are moving up. So, with no glove, that pitcher has got to, you're really pitching, as opposed to today to throwing.
Yeah.
The catchers are going to catch a ball that's throwing 100 miles an hour. There's no way a guy with no glove is going to catch a ball throwing 100 miles an hour. I don't care who you are. If you did it, it would only be once, because then you'd probably be, nursing a broken hand or finger or something. So the pitchers were really pitching in the 19th century in the professional era, 71 and on. They had to make sure that catcher could receive that ball when there was no one on base. And then and still throw it from 71 to 1887, still throw it where the batter is calling for, and have the catcher catch it. That's not easy to do, and I've done it a lot, and I challenge anybody to do it regularly and consistently. It's very difficult.
Wow.
Yeah, catching to me was the most important position, fairly deep into the 19th century. If you look at the overall records, career batting records of catchers in the 19th century, you see a lot of them who played 6 or 8 years in the major leagues and retired with a career batting average well below 200. And it was whereas there are actually very few pitchers who did. The pitchers were actually, for the most part, better hitters than the catchers. And the reason for it was that if the catcher could hang in there, handle the pitches, there was always a spot for him on almost any team, even the best ones.
That's what kept Bill Bergen around in the early 20th century.
Yeah, that lasted it did, throughout the dead ball era.
Yeah. Now, David said that the catcher was the most important position. I disagree, and only that he's part of the most important position. I think the catcher and pitcher together, that combination was the most important in baseball, certainly in the 19th century. If you go back to Jim Crichton, when Joe legged it, you have to have a catcher that can handle that type of pitching that Crichton was doing. With the experts, you had Joe Sprague throwing, just like Crichton, throwing the Waddy Beach as the catcher. Without those catchers, those pitchers can't be who they were. So that combination, to me, those two positions in concert together were the most important for any team. And then after that, I would go to first base to be the next most important player.
Yeah, to a degree that the battery, it's the battery is the most important position still today. You've got to have good pitching staff and good relievers and guys who can handle them. if you're going to go anywhere.
Casey Stengel said when they took Hobie Landreth with the first draft pick in the Mets expansion draft in 1961, he said if you don't have a catcher, you'll have a lot of pass balls.
Yeah.
So I'm sure they didn't, back in those days, they didn't keep numbers on that, you know.
Oh, they did. Pass ball, yeah. And there was always disputes between scorekeepers on whether, one paper would say that, Grasshopper Jim Whitney had 6 wild pitches and the catcher committed 4 pass balls. If they were playing Chicago, the Chicago paper might say that Whitney had 7 wild pitches and there were only 3 pass balls. So the scorekeepers played a very big factor in how these overall stats, and the stats weren't uniform.
I assume they were accurate based on the state of their inebriation.
Sometimes that's true. Inebriation of all concerned, not just the scorekeeper.
Lyle Spatz put out said at one of the records committee meeting for SABR years ago that it wasn't until the 50s or even maybe later than that if you add the players to the team to the league, it wouldn't balance.
No.
He said it wasn't until somewhere in the 50s that even started to happen.
Well, games didn't. It didn't really even the very last edition of the Macmillan Encyclopedia. You did not find. You couldn't account for who caught. There were 82 games played by a team, and yet there were given to for only 82 games caught, or 81 games caught sometimes, 80 games caught, and then sometimes there'd be because there was a lot of interesting things about scorekeeping then. If a player came into the game as a late inning substitute, and he can only come in for an injured player until 1890. If he came into the game and he didn't get an at bat and didn't handle a fielding chance, he oftentimes didn't get into the box score and wasn't credited for a game. And there were all kinds of strange things that resulted from that. And the record books are still and always will be incomplete. There's no way we're going to ever match up really fully with some of the 19th century stats, even batting championships, I think.
Yeah. Eric, obviously, in the games you play, one of the things they didn't have until I think 1895 was the infield fly rule.
That's a good point. Actually, the players league.
I had a pop up. The fielder would probably let it drop, and the runners basically didn't know what to do quite often.
Right now, that's a great statement. Players League was the first league to actually use it, which their only year was 1890, backed by John Ward, was a big force in that. Starting that league, it lasted 1 season. The National League started, technically the National League and the American Association of Baseball Clubs, that's what it was called, in 1894, first instituted, and then they amended it in 1895. So for the National League, historians would say 1894 was the first year. Now, that element, I wish that was still around today, because that is an effective tool for the defense. Just think about what happens here. If you have runners on base with less than 2 outs, first and second, or first, second, and third, and the batter
drops the ball and they wind up getting a double play or whatever out of it.
Right. Yeah. But listen to the way the rule has changed, which we know it today, which I played as a little leaguer, and it's gone, back until 1895. That is, you're helping the batter when yet the pitcher did his job. The pitcher was good enough to get this batter to pop a pop-up within the infield during an at-bat. And now you're rewarding the offensive team by saying, hey, you can only make 1 out. But yet the pitcher is being penalized, and the defending team is being penalized. I disagree with that. They should reinstitute that today. Now, let me give you a famous example of that happening in the game on June 14th. in 1870 when the Brooklyn Atlantic stopped the Cincinnati Red Stockings winning streak. And by my estimation, it was 96 games they had won in a row. That's counting some exhibitions and some games that were called short. George Wright, the shortstop, actually pulled that play in the 10th inning and received 2 outs. And that's actually mentioned in the box score. If you read the Times of Brooklyn Eagle, you can see that it says that was done. And it was, and I believe it was probably Chadwick Galos that it was a smart play. And it was. And if you, there have been other instances with the 19th century where that's occurred, but they're few and far between. And it didn't happen as often as I think it should have, and that's why it took until 1890 for the rule to be changed. I don't think that the defending teams used that to their advantage enough. Perhaps they thought it wasn't manly to not catch a ball when you had the chance to put the guy. I don't know what their thinking was, but when we play modern today, I instruct my ball players, hey, if someone's on base and there's a pop-up, know where you're going with that ball. You're not going to catch the ball. The first baseman will tell you, is the guy leading? Is he not leading? Is he looking to run? You have a good chance to make 2 outs, and I don't know why you would let that go, and then why the rules makers would make it so, hey, you can only make 1 out when the pitcher really is being penalized.
Well, there were triple plays registered on pop flies. You know, a batter would get disgusted, throw his bat aside, and start back to the bench. Rather than run to first, and the shortstop would let the ball drop. Rush over and tag second base, and then you'd end up getting a triple play, not unassisted, but because the only first unassisted triple play actually did not occur in the major leagues, as historians can determine. But definitely there were triple plays on pop flies and the infield flies.
Yeah, I think they did it to decrease the deception of the infielders of the defense.
Yeah.
Yes, but Al, you're hurting the pitcher for doing his job. I can't get over that as a pitcher. It really hurts me to see that rule.
Well, is he doing his job better just because he induces a pop fly, as opposed to inducing a feebly hit ground ball? And it's he's done his job. He's done his job by inducing the batter to hit a playable ball. I think I think we can say with much confidence that he's done a better job just because he gets a pop fly.
Yeah, one last thing. Before we have to end this in a couple of minutes. Eric, I used to know a guy who umpired a lot of these games named Harry Hyam.
Harry Hyam, yeah. Dick Hyam.
Of course I know Harry. I know him very well.
He's still doing this?
No, he's not. He when I formed the Mutual in 1989, he had found us through the internet, and of course his great-great-grandfather, Dick Hyam, was the Mutual's first captain, and of course he was also, as listeners may or may not know, he was the first umpire ever banned for baseball.
Yeah, Harry is quite the proof.
Still the only umpire ever banned for.
Harry's gone to great lengths to prove that. But yes, Harry, he was with us for many, many years in Mutuals, and I'm not with Mutuals anymore. I formed another team in 2003, but he stayed with us for quite some time, and he made some trips with us, and it was always nice to have him and to tell people, hey, this is a descendant of an actual 19th century player. It was good times.
Okay. I want to thank both of you. It's been very educational.
It has. It's been a really enjoyable experience all around, I think.
In the podcast, and hopefully we'll get a chance to do this again.
Yes, Al, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it, David. Nice to talk to you again.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you both.